Hi, folks. Welcome back. This is the first lecture on rock and roll. As you can see right here, we're going to start talking about the rock and roll era, and it is the first subject that will appear on your final exam. So again, the tests are not comprehensive. So there have been two tests, and now from this point forward, everything will be. This is the material for the final exam. So if that helps you sort of organize things, great. Okay. Before we get into it, I want to let you know this is a particularly long lecture with a lot of material. You can feel free to break it up, as much as you'd like, but this one is one big chunk. There's a tremendous amount of things on Moodle because you're listening to a lot of different songs and oftentimes more than one version of a song. And the questions I'm asking you on your daily assignment, I need you to listen to, say, an original version of a song and a cover version. Tell me the difference. Tell me why they're different. Tell me which ones you like more, that kind of stuff. So there's quite a bit going on this one. This is probably the largest assignment of the entire class, longest lecture and biggest assignment of the class. So just be forewarned. Feel free, again, to do it in chunks or give yourself enough time to do it, in one sitting. That's fine, just as a heads up. So in addition to all of the materials, all the songs I put up there, I put up some song lyrics, particularly on the song Shake, Rattle, and Roll. That'll be the first cover version we talk about. And there's a reason the lyrics are there. We'll get to that here soon. But there's also your very first Billboard listening assignment. And what these are, you will get 2 or 3 of these in your last week of class. And I'm trying to, or the last little bit of class here. I'm trying to give you this one with plenty of lead time here. What I've done is I'm asking you to revisit the Pandora assignment, where you had to answer questions about the song in bullet point form, right? So what's going to happen here is I have taken 10 songs, the top 10 songs according to Billboard magazine, the most popular songs of the rock and roll era, early rock and roll era, are these 10 songs here. Hound Dog by Elvis, Singing the Blues by Guy Mitchell, Mac the Knife by Bobby Darin, and so on. I want you to listen to each one of those songs, and then you have to answer these questions. Okay, so you put the title of the song and the artist, who wrote it, and when. You'll find that oftentimes the performers of the songs are not the songwriters, and sometimes they were written years, if not decades before they became a hit. Okay, what is the instrumentation? What is the sounds you hear? If you can describe it, I hear bass, drums, guitar, piano, mandolin, trumpets, whatever. Be as descriptive as possible. How would you categorize the song? Rock and roll, rhythm and blues, or soul? Rhythm and blues is really for the 50s. Soul is really more for the 60s, but you get the idea. Country and Western, American popular music, a crooner style. Other, is it something else? Is it something you can't categorize necessarily? Just let me know. Number 4 is going to take a little bit of research and a little more time, again, for each song. Are there any other recorded versions? You could just do a simple Google search, and that's going to help you out. In fact, just for fun here, the very first song is Hound Dog, right? So if we Google Hound Dog song, right? You'll get the song, but you'll also get just go to a wiki sort of thing for this. I'm sure that is great. Hound Dog has been recorded more than 250 times. I don't need all of those, obviously. I just need a couple of other versions, right? So if you can't find them here, another great thing you could do, actually, as you track these songs down to listen to, you could always go to YouTube. I would accept this sort of thing as well. And you could type in Hound Dog, and look at this. You get one by Elvis, which is the one that's on the assignment. You get Big Mama Thornton's, which we're going to talk about in our assignment. You get Shawn Mendes. You get a bunch of people. So if I just Google this, Again, a lot of Elvis and Big Mama Thornton. Those are the keys. There's a Shawn Mendes. Elvis, 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 Elvis. You will eventually find some other ones. Jimi Hendrix. That'd be cool. Miley Cyrus. Okay. Some of these haven't actually been recorded. If they appear on YouTube, it might be from a live concert or something. But, for the sake of the assignment, I would kind of accept that. That's fine, because I want you to listen to another version. So are there any recorded versions of this song? And then by whom? You can give me 2 or 3 or 4. That'd be great. Pick one of those covers. Listen to it, right? Let me know which is the cover or which is the original. Sometimes the song I'm asking for here is already a cover. In that case, listen to this cover and then find the original, or listen to another cover. That's fine. And then let me know which version you prefer. And then question 5, do you like the version listed on the assignment? That was the original one here, right? And then go into some detail. Why or why not? Just like I asked you to do on the Pandora assignments, okay? Do not write a paragraph for each selection. Instead, only give me these bullet points, and only give a longer answer for questions 4 and 5. Okay? That'd be great. Yeah, this is an example, for example. Don't Be Cruel, right? It should look like this. It was written by Otis Blackwell and Elvis Presley in 1956. It was actually written by Otis Blackwell. Elvis Presley sort of got partial credit, but he didn't actually write any of it. These are the sounds I hear when I hear the recording. I would classify it as rock and roll. There are covers by Connie Francis, Cheap Trick, Merle Haggard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Devo, all kinds. I listen to the Devo version. I appreciate the Elvis version more. And then you can go on to explain why or why. Why, yes, you like the Elvis version, or no, you do not like the Elvis version, so on, right? You're going to do that for 20 songs, 10 top 10s from 55 to 59, and the top 10 songs of the 60s. This is going to take a while. Each song is around 3.5 minutes, okay? So right there, you're looking at well over an hour's worth of music. Then I'm asking you to listen to covers or additional versions of as many of these songs as you can find. Most of them they were popular. So if they were popular, people were going to make other versions of them. So the vast majority of these have other versions that you can find. That's another hour, okay? And then you have to write about them, okay? So it's kind of a big project. Get started, start chipping away, right? And keep in mind that this is only the 50s and 60s. I'm going to ask you to do the same thing for the 70s and 80s. And I will ask you to do the same thing for the 90s and at least the first decade of the 2000s, okay? This is where the rubber meets the road here, so it's 20 songs. Some of the other ones, time permitting, might be a little bit shorter, okay? When you're done listening to all 20 songs and done answering these 5 bullet points for each song, I want you to then answer these 6 questions at the end, okay? These, again, not necessarily a paragraph or an essay or anything like that. Just give me a couple of sentences for each one at the most, okay? But it's to kind of get you thinking about how the music is going to change from the beginning of the rock and roll era, the mid-50s, up until now, right? And you will see, particularly on things like how would you classify this music? How would you categorize this song? That's going to change pretty dramatically over 50 years, okay? Here's the rubric, right? All this is posted to Moodle. Again, it's going to take a while. I suggest you get started. And as always, be very descriptive. Avoid things like it has a catchy beat or I dig the song's flow or stuff like that. Be descriptive. Tell me what about the song makes it catchy. What about the flow is groovy? That kind of stuff, okay? So again, be as descriptive as possible. All right. So with that in mind, let's get started on, again, this fairly long lecture with a lot of stopping and referring to other tunes on Moodle. There's just a lot going on here in the early rock and roll era. But it's important, and I want to obviously tie a lot of these things together. All right? So the rock and roll era, 1954 to 1959, early rock and roll. The 60s are still very much rock and roll era. So we're really only talking about the beginning of it here, okay? It brings huge changes to American popular music. Okay, previous styles previously on the margins, in the periphery, suddenly are thrust into the center and they dominate. And that's rhythm and blues. Race records, which became rhythm and blues, now are a huge influence on rock and roll. Hillbilly music, which became country and western, is now a huge influence on rock and roll. But there are still elements of American popular song in rock and roll. So all of these components together are kind of fusing into this rock and roll, brand new rock and roll music. Okay, rhythm and blues and country music were no longer geared towards their special race markets either. It wasn't just black music marketed to a black audience or rural white music marketed to a white audience. It's all coming together here. And in the early 60s, we will finally get some sort of the final pieces of the landmark sort of civil rights legislation desegregating schools and things like that. So the music is going to sort of get sort of officially desegregated in a sense too. Okay. Now, one of the big reasons here why this era is and the huge changes and everything sort of happens is the audience. I asked you on the very first assignment, what was your first record that you, or songs or whatever that you got for yourself that you were really excited about, and how old were you? In reviewing those assignments, the earliest was like 8 or 9 years old. The latest was someone was upwards of 17 or 18. But the vast majority of you were all like 10, 11, 12 was the zone. Okay. That's when you started to take enough of an interest in popular music that you went out and got some of your own music or got some music as a gift or something like that. Right. Well, if we take 10 years old as sort of our baseline, in 1954, 1955, if you back up 10 years, that's 1944, 1945, something monumental happens in 1945, and that's the end of World War II. And something else sort of monumental happens at the end of World War II when all of the sailors come home from the Pacific Fleet, all of the soldiers come home from Europe, right? They get together with their sweeties, and very soon thereafter, you get what's known as the baby boomer generation. And these families, dad came back from the war, right? They start having a family. They might have 3, 4, 5, 6 kids. And let's say the first kid is born in 46 or something, 1946. And then every couple of years, there's a new family member. So a child is born in 1946, a child is born in 1948, a child is born in 1950, 1952, 1954. These are your grandparents, more than likely. You should ask them. You should, next time you talk to them, if you're able, if you visit them often, or if they're nearby, or text them or call them, figure out when they were born, ask them if they were part of the baby boomer generation. There's a very good chance that they are. And depending on sort of what member of the family they are they old? Are they the oldest baby boomer in their family? Were they born in 1946? Right after the war, 1946, 47. Were they born were they the youngest of a baby boomer generation? Again, let's say it's a family of 5. You had children born in 46, 48, 50, 52, and 54. A family of 5 kids, right? Every 2 years. And again, I'm just sort of speculating here. But the child born in 1946, by the time they're 10 years old, they're going to be full on into this early rock and roll of Elvis Presley, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Little Richard. This early rock and roll they're going to be into. If a kid is born in 1956, if your grandparents were the youngest or one of the younger sides of their baby boomer family and they're 1956, fast forward 10 years for them when they start getting really interested in popular music. And in 1956, fast forward 10 years, you're in 1966. Now you actually beat the raging excitement that was Beatlemania in 1966 is very much present. And that's actually when the Beatles start to experiment, right around 1966, when they start getting more and more experimental in their music. So my point is, ask your grandparents if they had any siblings, where are they? what year were they born? Are they the youngest? Are they the oldest? The oldest of the baby boomer kids, those are going to be, oftentimes, this is not a foolproof system, but oftentimes those are going to be the Elvis Presley fans, because they were there when rock and roll first exploded onto the scene, and they were that audience around 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. So there's a very good chance that they might have been Elvis Presley fans. If you were the youngest member of a baby boomer family born in the early to mid 50s, right? Chances are they were going to be the Beatles fans, because the Beatles arrived in 63. I think the Beatles arrived in 1963, or maybe early 64, right? So if they were born in 54, well, 10 years later, now they're there for all the excitement of Beatlemania, right? So this is the things are going to change really quickly, and depending on where they are in that baby boomer generation, it really is going to affect their sort of favorite artists in a sense. But again, check with your grandparents, ask them, see where they're at as far as the music of their youth. Okay, that is the driving force behind rock and roll and sort of the consumerism of all this young rock and roll music. It's these young kids who are buying tons and tons of records. Okay, here you go. The target audience for rock and roll was the baby boomer generation, which I just elaborated on probably for longer than you needed. Okay, the term rock and roll, which we discussed earlier, comes from the rocking and rolling references in race records and rhythm and blues records, which is some innuendo standing, which means other things, right? Which I hope, without giving too much away, I hope you figured out by now what rockin' and rollin' is in these records. Okay, great. The term rock and roll was actually apparently coined by Alan Freed. Alan Freed was a very famous disc jockey and concert promoter. He was the Howard Stern of the mid-50s, basically. He worked his way up, got probably a nationwide DJ gig on like NBC radio. So he preferred playing the original rhythm and blues versions of a lot of these songs versus the white cover versions. We're going to get into that in great depth today. And that helped generate some buzz and some popularity. He eventually moved up to New York, the biggest market in the country. He had a TV show, The Rock and Roll Dance Party. He starred in some sort of B movies in the early rock and roll era about sort of teenage culture and this rock and roll and that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, as you can see here, this still was very much a segregated society in 1958. And his Rock and Roll Dance Party TV show was canceled when the camera was spinning around to the dancers, to the kids dancing, and they saw a black teenage singer by the name of Frankie Lyman dancing with a white girl. And that was too much for a lot of American homes who were watching the show in 1958. The switchboard lit up. We'll never watch this show again, blah, blah, blah. And they canceled it, which is really, thank goodness we've come much further than that. Alan Freed's downfall, we could spend more time on this topic, but we won't. We don't have that much time to waste. But Alan Freed's downfall was known as the payola scandal. And the payola scandal was basically federal bribery charges. DJs were often paid in bribes to promote new records. So record companies or record salesmen might come into town. They fill up the record store with all the new hits, right? But then they go on the way out of town, they stop at the most popular radio station in town and they talk to the most popular DJ, and they might hand that person an envelope full of cash and say, hey, this new record by Buddy Holly is going to be a big hit. Wink, wink, nod, nod, right? And so then the DJ says, I think you're right. And so every hour on the hour, they play this new Buddy Holly record, and the DJ says, what a great new record. And, oh, this is fantastic. Have you heard the new Buddy Holly record? And these young, impressionable 10, 11, 12-year-old kids who are the baby boomer generation, this knowledgeable voice is coming out of the radio. And they're telling me what records are good. eventually that sort of wears you down. If the DJ says this is a great record, this must be a great record. So leading to more people buying those records, right? So that's the whole kind of thing that was the payola scandal. Alan Freed was accused of accepting bribes from record companies, fired by WABC, and then later found guilty of commercial bribery. So ends our little discussion about Alan Freed, okay? What I want to spend a good amount of time on, and this usually takes a couple of days, like almost a whole week during the semester, because we keep touching back on it, particularly in this early rock and roll era, is the concept of cover versions. People recording a song, it's a minor hit, and then other people recording the song, oftentimes making it more popular than the original. Okay, so covers are copies of previously recorded performances, usually aimed at cashing in on the success of the original recording. Oftentimes, the majority of times, they are making covers of rhythm and blues songs. And what they're doing is, again, this gets back to the haves and the have-nots. The independent record labels that are focusing on rhythm and blues artists, black rhythm and blues artists, Atlantic Records, Specialty Records, Chess Records, things like that. They might have a rhythm and blues artist that has a pretty good song. It does well on the rhythm and blues charts. It doesn't really cross over and have a tremendous amount of success. So now a major record company like Columbia or RCA or Decca, they will make a new version of the song with a white artist and heavily promote it. And oftentimes it is that white artist that their version of the record does better. Now, we've actually covered this multiple times already. We're talking about the rock and roll era now. But if we go back to jazz, Paul Whiteman was the king of jazz, even though he was white and his band played precious little jazz. Meanwhile, King Oliver or Louis Armstrong are doing much more sort of authentic hot jazz. You had lots of people buy jazz records because they heard of Paul Whiteman and they thought Paul Whiteman was the safe, sort of easy digestible, again, white prince or king in this case of jazz. So they would buy Paul Whiteman records, and that would sort of ease them into authentic jazz. Same thing happened with ragtime, we talked about, with the Castles in particular. The Castles were this very handsome, sophisticated, aristocratic, white, and safe ballroom dancing couple. If they're dancing to some of the syncopated dance music, the turkey trot, the grizzly bear, yada yada, it makes it acceptable for mainstream white America, bridging the gap, acting as a conduit to make ragtime more acceptable. That is really what happens here. It's a segregated society in the late 50s. I can buy a record by Little Richard, or I could buy a record by Pat Boone. It's the same song, but people might buy the Pat Boone record. They might like his voice more. They might like his interpretation of the song more, or they just might like it because Pat Boone was a white Anglo-Saxon gentleman, whereas Little Richard was black. And that's how the world works, and did work at that time. Okay? So the singers that benefited from this the most were white singers like Pat Boone on major record companies. And in a roundabout way, a lot of people would actually, it would oftentimes benefit the original artists. They might buy the cover version by a white artist, and then later on down the road, they might buy the original version by the black artist. I'll let you decide, exactly how you feel about this. All right. How is this even legal? That's a good question. Well, here is sort of the gist of it. Pardon me. In 1947, there's a recording by Paula Watson, who is a black rhythm and blues singer, of a song called A Little Bird Told Me. And a couple years later, a white singer for Decca Records, which was a big major record company, took Paula Watson's song, which was recorded on a small independent label known as Supreme, and redid it. Evelyn Knight was white, and Decca Records had the ability to make a cover version and market it and profit on it. Okay, I have uploaded onto Moodle for you the Paula Watson version of A Little Bird Told Me, followed by the Evelyn Knight version of A Little Bird Told Me. They are very, very similar. They both start with sort of a cappella. The Paula Watson version is kind of humming, that sort of thing. The Evelyn Knight version, it's more oohs and ahs, but it starts a cappella. Then you sort of get this boom chick, boom chick, boom chick, boom chick in the piano. Bass chord, bass chord, bass chord, like that. The bass and drums are playing along with that as well. There's hand clapping, right? Basically, all the pieces of the puzzle in the Paula Watson version are in the Evelyn Knight version. There's background singers. In the Evelyn Knight Decca version, the background singers are a little more polished and they're used a little bit more often. But otherwise, these arrangements are almost identical. Okay. Well, Supreme, which was the record company of Paula Watson, sued Decca and lost, as you can see right there, lost. The judge at that time ruled that musical arrangements are not copyrightable. So the song, whoever wrote the song, A Little Bird Told Me, they got paid, they got royalties for the Paula Watson version and royalties for the Evelyn Knight version. The musicians, they got paid for recording each version. But the record company, in this case, Supreme, got nothing at all, even though their property, which was the arrangement of this song, was copied almost note for note. Okay, this is not how it works anymore. This would be very much illegal nowadays. But again, early on, they haven't kind of figured this out yet. So that's how this ruling came down. And with this, opened the floodgates of all kinds of shenanigans, if you will, of cover versions, particularly ripping off of black rhythm and blues records. Although they would also take advantage of, again, Latin records. In a previous lecture, I gave you Damaso Perez Prado, right? And his version of Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White versus other people's versions and things of that nature. Okay, so go listen to Paula Watson and Evelyn Knight's A Little Bird Told Me. Listen to how similar they are. Just kind of understand that, see how you feel about Evelyn Knight and Decca Records. I should say Decca Records taking advantage of Supreme Records. Evelyn Knight was a singer on staff. I don't believe she had any role, a malicious role in like taking advantage of Supreme. Decca said, "You're our singer. You're going to sing this record. Go," and she just did it, right? So go listen to those two records, and then, of course, come back for much, much more. Go. Okay. So, like I mentioned, this opened the floodgates, and I'm going to give you actually quite a few examples here. And there are, positive and negative outcomes of this sort of cover version stuff. All right. The first thing here I'm going to talk about is the song Shake, Rattle, and Roll, which was originally recorded by Big Joe Turner. Big Joe Turner led sort of a Kansas City-style jump band. He sang, there was sort of a boogie-woogie piano thing. There'd be some horn players in the back, similar to Louis Jordan, which we talked about during Rhythm and Blues. That's kind of what Big Joe Turner did, okay? So he was a rhythm and blues artist, an African-American rhythm and blues artist. He recorded the song Shake, Rattle, and Roll, okay? And this was his biggest hit for Atlantic Records, which I have uploaded for you, and I have provided the lyrics for it, okay? So at this point, I want you to go listen to the Big Joe Turner version of Shake, Rattle, and Roll. Follow along with the lyrics, all right? And then when you're done, of course, come back. So pause this, go listen to Big Joe Turner now. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. It's a great song. Now, that song was covered by Bill Haley and the Comets, and as hopefully by now you figured out, the lyrics for both versions are on the same document, right? But the lyrics get changed. Big Joe Turner is very much a black rhythm and blues performer, and there is a spirit or a tradition of, innuendo, which we've already talked about with Black Snake Moan of Blind Lemon Jefferson, and other elements up until this point. We went over Hound Dog previously, and what is Hound Dog about, and what's the innuendo in Big Mama Thornton's version of Hound Dog that is missing in Elvis's version, for example, right? That happens in this song as well. So the original lyrics refer to certain things, and shaking, rattling, and rolling refers to certain things in Big Joe Turner's version. Now I want you to listen to Bill Haley and the Comets version and follow along with the lyrics. Some of the verses line up pretty closely, okay, but you can definitely see where they made some changes. Those changes were done by the producer, Milt Gabler, to ensure airplay on more conservative white radio stations. What they did was they balderized the lyrics. Balderize is a verb meaning to remove material that is considered improper or offensive from a text or account, especially with the result that it becomes weaker and less effective. Okay? So, with that in mind, and the innuendo that you can glean off of the Big Joe Turner version, now go listen to the Bill Haley and the Comets version and kind of see how they watered the whole thing down, okay? As you can see, this was only a minor hit for Bill Haley and the Comets when it was first released, although it did come back later and climb back up the charts. Also, when you're done listening to this song, I want you to go to your daily assignment now, okay? And the first 3 questions are about the Big Joe Turner's version of Shake, Rattle, and Roll and Bill Haley and the Comets version of Shake, Rattle, and Roll. So listen to the songs, listen to both of the songs, follow along with the lyrics, answer questions 1, 2, and 3 on your daily assignment, and of course, come back. All right? I'll see you in a few minutes. Go! Okay. I hope you enjoyed those 2 songs. Maybe you recognize the Bill Haley version in particular. Okay, it's kind of a classic. A lot of people don't know the Big Joe Turner version, but now you do. Okay, I'm going to give you a few other examples of this and how basically things will get cleaned up for mainstream, and by mainstream I mean white radio play. Okay, another song would be the song Shaboom. The song Shaboom was a big hit. It was recorded by the Chords. The Chords was an African-American vocal harmony group. So this is like doo-wop music that we talked about in rhythm and blues. That's essentially what this was, okay? It's a AABA, American Popular Song form, okay? As you can see, this was a very popular song, number 2 on the rhythm and blues charts, and it crossed over and went all the way up to number 5 on the pop charts in 1954. I didn't provide the lyrics. You don't really need them. I just want you to go listen to the Chords and Shaboom. Notice that there is a saxophone solo in there. I always draw attention to the saxophone solo because that is sort of a calling card of a rhythm and blues song. So many rhythm and blues tunes have, or the bands have saxophone players, whether it's these jump bands or even maybe an urban blues with the electric guitar might also have a saxophone, or the blues crooner has a saxophone to go along with him or something. This is very, very common in music of this era. Again, coming out of like downsized big bands and saxophone being so prominent in jazz, you get some saxophone in rhythm and blues records. The reason I'm bringing that up is because it affects what comes next. So go listen to the Chords version of Shaboom and then come back. Go. Okay, I hope you liked it. That brings us to the Crew Cuts version of Shaboom. Okay, now where the Chords did again very well, number 5 on the pop charts. there's not much room to do better than number 5 on the pop charts. All right. The Crew Cuts version of the same song was number 1 for 9 weeks. The song was written by the Chords. The Crew Cuts, which was another vocal harmony group, but a white vocal harmony group, took the same song, all right, but they, in many ways, sort of de-ethnicized it. They took some of the rhythm and blues out of it. There is no saxophone solo, for example. Right? One of the most telling features of the R&B sound from this era is that saxophone. They got rid of it, and they replaced it with some like scat singing and a timpani stroke. If you know what a timpani is, they're the great big copper drums you see in an orchestra, and you can change the pitch by stepping on a pedal. So it goes boing like that. That's going to appear in this version, kind of like a novelty record. It's going to be humorous. Okay, there's other things in the Crew Cuts version. It actually kind of sounds like an old big band record in a few spots. They have like some clarinets, do 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 do, like a little reed section thing, which again could have come straight off a Glenn Miller record. Some swinging trumpet sounds could have come straight off a Tommy Dorsey record or something like that. The record sounds a little more old-fashioned in a lot of ways. Okay. So what they did, they didn't need to change any lyrics. They didn't need to clean up the language of the song, but they did, again, sort of de-ethnicize it. They took away some of the most important African-American elements, improvisation, saxophone solo, those sorts of things, and they you get this other version. So go listen to the Crew Cuts version of Sh-Boom, and then when you're done, I want you to answer question 4 on the daily assignment, which is really a simple question. I want to know which version you like best. Do you like the original by the Chords, or do you like the cover by the Crew Cuts? That's it. If you can explain why, that'd be great. I'm always kind of curious as to where people fall. And this is as good a song as any to figure that out. Okay? So go listen to the Crew Cuts Sh-Boom now. Compare and contrast. Answer number 4 on your daily question, on your daily assignment to let me know which one you like best. Okay? And of course, then come back. Go. Okay, thanks for staying with me. The last version, or the last cover song we're going to talk about here, from black to white in a sense, is the song Mystery Train by Little Junior Parker. It was covered by Elvis. It was one of Elvis's first records. It was his 4th record, actually. The original was recorded by Little Junior Parker for Sun Records, which is a small independent record label in Memphis, Tennessee. Okay? And it's the song about a train that's coming to take his baby away from him. That long black train takes my baby from home. It's sad. It's depressing. Okay? The train brought her back, and he's sad because he knows the train is always coming to take her away from him. Okay? So go listen to it. Go listen to Little Junior Parker's Mystery Train, and then come back. We'll talk about the Elvis version. Go. Okay, here we are. Now the Elvis version of the song. Now, unlike Shake, Rattle, and Roll, where they had to change the lyrics to avoid, innuendo and double entendres, and unlike the tune Sh-Boom, where they changed the instrumentation to make it sound less rhythm and bluesy, they didn't do a whole lot of different things to this. It sounds different because it's an Elvis recording and it's the band backing Elvis versus Little Junior Parker's. But again, there wasn't a whole lot to kind of fix necessarily outside of, again, occasional solo type thing here and there. And this one didn't profit a major record company. At this time, Elvis was also recording for Sun Records. So Sun Records had both of these songs. They had both versions. So Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records, got 2 for the price of 1 here. So it's not like a major record company is profiting off a white version versus a black version. And they're not necessarily cleaning up the lyrics or the instrumentation for any particular reason. But just as to provide one more example and to kind of grease the wheels for our Elvis discussion, what Elvis does is he changes just enough words to make it, instead of a sad song, how it's going to take my baby from home, it becomes more optimistic. The long black train brings his baby there, but then instead of saying that it will take him back home, take her away from him again, he says that will never happen again. So it's a little bit more optimistic. Okay, this is the last record Elvis made before he signed with a major record company, RCA Victor. Okay, so go listen to both versions if you haven't already listened to the other one. Go listen to both versions of Mystery Train. Okay, and compare and contrast, and then come back. Go. Okay, so now let's get into a couple of business things before we dig into the meat and potatoes of more songs. Okay, the rock and roll business by the mid 50s, late 50s was really taking off. You will see in the Billboard assignment that not all the top 10 hits of the last half of the 50s were rock and roll songs. Many of them are not, because there's still lingering popular music from earlier eras, the decade before, which was the Big Singer era and stuff like that. There's still plenty of that. But rock and roll is clearly getting firmly entrenched. Again, it is these baby boomers, pardon me, record players and radios are being sold all the time. And with that, and with these growing families and all of these kids, they're buying records like crazy. Record sales went from 191 million in 51 to $500 million in 59. And that would only continue to grow and flourish. The record business, a lot of money was made. Okay, so now we're full on into rock and roll, and we're going to talk about how the two peripheral musics, rhythm and blues and country and western, kind of contribute to rock and roll. And to do that, we're going to do it through individuals. So we're going to take three black performers who were rhythm and blues performers, or out of a rhythm and blues mold, but essentially became the first black rock and roll stars. And then on the same thing we'll do on the countryside, where there were three white performers, essentially out of the country and western mold or realm, who became the first white white rock and roll stars. Okay, but we'll start with the rhythm and blues side, and that's Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Fats Domino. Little Richard is still alive. Chuck Berry and Fats Domino have since passed, unfortunately. Okay. All right. Charles Edward Chuck Berry. Charles Edward Anderson, Chuck Berry. Okay. Chuck Berry was a guitar player, absorbing the blues of like Chicago Electric Blues, rural bluesmen, that sort of stuff, and rhythm and blues styles of jump bands and things of that nature, and fusing it with writing songs for a young audience. And he created a style that was very appealing to just about everybody of that early baby boomer generation. A lot of people picked up a guitar because of Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry doesn't get enough credit, quite frankly, as being like an early guitar hero in rock and roll. His music was very popular, which led him to be quite popular for a while. Okay. I'm uploading a couple, actually just one Chuck Berry song. That's right. I'm giving you one Chuck Berry song, although there are countless others, and they're all good. Go check them out. But I'm asking you to listen to the song Maybelline. Without giving you listening guides or anything to follow along with, I think everyone's pretty comfortable with the 12-bar blues by this point. And I'm less concerned about you following the form and more concerned about just listening to the style and the differences between these musicians, really. So listen to Maybelline. It is a verse chorus or verse refrain sort of thing based along the 12-bar blues. The refrain or chorus is the 12-bar blues. Maybelline, why can't you be true? Maybelline, why can't you be true? You can't do anything something you used to do. I can't remember all the words. Okay? But that's AAB, 12-bar blues, makes total sense. The verses, where again the action takes place, he talks about his V8 Ford chasing. She's in a Coupe de Ville. He's in a V8 Ford. He's chasing her. It starts to rain over the hill. Blah blah blah. The lyrics come really fast, and it's not always easy to hear them clearly. But the verses is where the action unfolds, and that does not follow the 12-bar blues pattern. He just vamps on one chord. And then when he gets back to the refrain or the chorus, Maybelline, why don't you be true? Maybelline, why can't you be true? Do anything to band I used to do, right? That part, that's the 12-bar blues. So go listen to Chuck Berry's Maybelline. And one thing you could really listen for in particular, other than the form, if you'd like, is the recording quality. Compare Chuck Berry's Maybelline, the recording quality, to Nat King Cole's Nature Boy. Nat King Cole's Nature Boy was a major record company with an orchestra, and they had all the great microphones and the engineers and all this sort of stuff. Chuck Berry's Maybelline is basically a live recording. It's just get the band in the studio, kind of get the balance right, and go. And it sounds a little rougher on the edges, but that's was appealing at that time, and that's how they recorded this music. Go. Okay, as I mentioned before, a lot of these early rock and roll musicians from this era, and I talked about it with Hank Williams first, is they're writing songs that appeal to baby boomers. The language of the songs is very much for preteens and teens. So Chuck Berry was really good at this. He wrote a lot of songs celebrating teenage culture, right? School Day, every kid goes to school. So that makes sense. Rock and roll music, that's actually a rock and roll song about rock and roll and about the culture of rock and roll. It was covered by the Beatles in 1963. Roll Over Beethoven praises rhythm and blues and rock and roll at the expense of that old stuffy classical music. Your parents listen to this old square music. You listen to this new hip cool stuff, right? Also covered by the Beatles. Sweet Little 16 and so on, okay? If Chuck Berry influences a group like the Beatles, there's a tremendous amount of, information to be gleaned from this whole situation. That's a very influential musical source that the Beatles could take it and run with it. That's a big deal. The Beatles would cover early Chuck Berry, early Little Richard, early Elvis Presley, that kind of stuff, okay? So those are just a handful of other Chuck Berry tunes. By all means, go check them out. But I can really only put so many tunes on Moodle. I overwhelmed you already, I'm sure. It's a long assignment. You can check some of these out in your spare time. They're great tunes. Start up a streaming channel of like early rock and roll, and you'll know exactly what I mean. Okay, so that's Chuck Berry in a nutshell. All right. The next person was Little Richard, Richard Wayne Penniman, also known as Little Richard. He started his career as an early R&B performer, very much in a jump band tradition. Little Richard played the piano, and he sang, and he had a band behind him with a small horn section, a couple of trumpets, a couple saxophones, bass, and drums. So again, very much like the Louis Jordan sort of band. But in this case, the singer was also the piano player, okay? Little Richard had some big hits. I'm going to ask you to listen to two of them. Tutti Frutti, which was number 2 on the rhythm and blues charts and number 17 on the pop charts. Just about everybody's heard the song Tutti Frutti. A wop, baba, loo, bop, a wop, bam, boom, right? Full of falsetto singing and very exuberant shouts and whoops and all that kind of stuff. That was Little Richard's style. I'm also going to ask you to listen to Long Tall Sally. And I do want you to listen to both of them because I've also provided covers of both of them, okay? Very much the youthful energy and exuberance and the abandon celebrated in this early rock and roll. He had a sound and a look. He had an androgynous look that was very influential to later performers like David Bowie, Prince, and people like that, okay? So I'm going to ask you to listen to Tutti Frutti, and I'm also going to ask you to listen to Long Tall Sally. This was based on the 12-bar blues, right? Adapted to that more verse chorus thing. We did this during the rhythm and blues lecture, where part of the 12-bar blues is a verse that changes time and time again, and then another part of it is the refrain that comes back the same all the time. That's what happens in Long Tall Sally. Again, I haven't provided a listening guide or anything like that. I don't think it's necessary at this point. Just listen to the tune. Try and follow along with the words. Again, it's very rapid fire. Okay, but again, it's that same sort of setup. Long Tall Sally, also covered by the Beatles. So just like those Chuck Berry tunes, this is very influential stuff. And the Beatles music kind of comes out of them learning the music of these African American rhythm and blues / early rock and roll performers. Okay, so I want you to go listen to Long Tall Sally. Okay, and then I want you to go and listen. I want you to look at questions 5 and 6. We could do 5 and 6, I suppose, at the same time of your daily assignment. Okay. In addition to providing the original version of Tutti Frutti and Long Tall Sally, I've also provided cover versions by Pat Boone. Now, Little Richard was a black rhythm and blues and rock and roll performer. Pat Boone was a white performer, a white popular song performer. But he worked, again, as sort of an interpreter, making this music that is new. It's a little rough around the edges. It is definitely by black artists. Makes it a little safer for, again, middle America, who some, again, your great-great-grandparents, your grandparents may have wanted a Little Richard record. And your great-grandparents might not have wanted to buy a record with Little Richard, but they would buy a Tutti Frutti by Pat Boone instead, right? Because they are from a town that they don't know a whole lot about African American culture or the music or anything like that. They're a little leery of it, right? So they might buy the cover version instead. So after listening to Tutti Frutti in particular, both versions, I want you to answer question 5 on the listening guide. Okay, you might have to do a little research. You might have to look up some lyrics and that kind of stuff. But I want you to compare and contrast the lyrics of the two songs. All right, and then listen to Long Tall Sally, both versions, and then you can answer most of question 6. Okay, and then of course come back for more. Go. Okay, the last rhythm and blues, black rhythm and blues to rock and roll performer is Fats Domino, Antoine Domino. Mr. Domino was an established presence on the rhythm and blues charts for many, many years. He actually got his start a little bit before the others. And then sort of the ground shifted underneath him. He was a rhythm and blues player, again, very much like a jump band sort of thing. And then they just started calling it rock and roll. But he didn't really change. He just kept doing the same thing. But he was, again, one of the first black rock and roll artists. Okay. He had a big hit with the song Ain't It a Shame, or it's actually Ain't That a Shame. That's weird how I did that. Sorry. Ain't That a Shame. There we go. Much better. Number 10 on the pop charts. Number 1 on the rhythm and blues charts. This was a well-known tune, a very well-known popular tune. So I've uploaded that for you. Okay. I have also uploaded the version of Ain't That a Shame that was done by none other than Pat Boone. So I want you to listen to both versions of Ain't That a Shame, and then you can finish answering question 6. So on question 6, I ask you, again, you're going to need to do a little bit of research. What was the chart position of the two Little Richard songs and the Fats Domino song? What was the chart position of the covers by Pat Boone, right? That's kind of what I want you to think about there and answer question 6. So when you do that, after you listen to those, go back and listen to that, or go back and answer question 6. Outside of this particular song, Ain't That a Shame, Antoine Fats Domino, actually his versions usually outperformed the white cover versions. So unlike Little Richard, who seemed to be constantly one-upped by white cover versions, Fats Domino actually was able to sort of beat that back and typically did better. He also, unlike the other two gentlemen we've spoken about, he recorded a lot of standard tunes, good old-fashioned standard pop songs. Fats Domino was sort of from the Louisiana area, and perhaps the tradition of pop singing and jazz and that kind of stuff led him to record well-known pop tunes. For example, Blueberry Hill was one of his most popular records, and that was 1956. Blueberry Hill at that point was 20 years old. That was a standard American pop song that was recorded by many jazz bands. It was recorded by the Glenn Miller Band, actually, recorded by Louis Armstrong, recorded by all kinds of people like that. So Fats Domino would sort of do a little bit of that as well. Okay, those are the three African American artists coming from the rhythm and blues tradition into rock and roll. All right, that I want to focus on. All right, all of these gentlemen, as black artists, typically worked on independent labels. It was new music, and they were black artists. So Chuck Berry recorded for Chess, Little Richard recorded for Specialty, and Fats Domino recorded for Imperial. All of these small record companies could be taken advantage of by large record companies like Decca or RCA, with singers like Evelyn Knight or Pat Boone. They could take a song, thanks to the Little Bird Told Me decision. They could take a song and re-record it and try and profit from it, even though they didn't write it. Okay? So that's what we're talking about there. On the country side of things, we're going to flip this over, and we're going to talk about the country side of things. And to start with, the biggest early rock and roll star to come out of the countryside, maybe to come out of both sides anyway, is Elvis Presley. Elvis was born in Tupelo, Mississippi, but he moved to Memphis, Tennessee as a teenager. He was an only child. He was actually born a twin, but his twin brother was stillborn. So he was the only child of the Presleys. They were always a little on the rough, on the lower side of the economic ladder. So Elvis didn't grow up in comfort. He grew up sort of, if not on the wrong side of the tracks, very close to the wrong side of the tracks. And that actually turned out to be a bit of an advantage because, as I mentioned before, he was in Memphis, Tennessee, where that was the first town that had a radio station dedicated to an African American listening audience. Elvis could turn on the radio and hear white popular music and country music. He could turn the dial and get black popular music and rhythm and blues. He could walk out his front door and there would be a white church that his mom would take him to down on the right, but he could hear the music of the black church down on his left. I don't know if that's literally what happened, but my point is he got all of this. He was in the right place when all of this stuff was mixing around, and he was able to consume all of it. And then as he learned songs and put his own little spin on songs, he was able to put his own version, his own spin on things, which is really what made Elvis Presley Elvis Presley. Elvis did not write any songs. Elvis is not known as a songwriter. He didn't have to write songs. He started out by covering other people's songs. And then once he became a star, people brought songs to him. Elvis, sing this song, right? So he never had to write any songs. Again, the biggest rock and roll star to come from the countryside of music. His very first recordings were for Sun Records, which was a label in Memphis. Apparently, he went to the record station and he said he wanted to make a recording for his mom's birthday. And people speculate, was that actually true, or was it just an excuse to get into the recording studio and be heard? It really doesn't matter. It all worked out, right? I have provided quite a few things for you to listen to here. And the reason is I want to show you more of the cover version situation, but also how Elvis and then rock and roll in general benefited from this situation, okay? So the very first record that Elvis made for Sun Records had That's All Right Mama on one side and Blue Moon of Kentucky on the other side. So A side was That's All Right Mama, B side was Blue Moon of Kentucky. Both of these are covers, right? So I want you to listen to the Elvis version of That's All Right Mama. And then I want you to listen to the original, which was by a guy that sounds like essentially an urban blues, electric guitar, urban blues musician by the name of Arthur Crudup. Arthur Crudup recorded the original That's All Right Mama. Elvis obviously covered it and released it as part of his first record. The point being, here's Elvis, a handsome, white, safe-looking young man from the South, um, basically taking black music and putting it in a more presentable package, just like Paul Whiteman did with jazz, just like the Castles did with ragtime. This is exactly the same thing, just in a different time period. Okay? So listen to both of those. Listen to both versions of That's All Right. Then listen to Blue Moon of Kentucky. Listen to Elvis's version. And then listen to the original, which was actually the original song was written and recorded by Bill Monroe. Bill Monroe was the gentleman we talked about when we were talking about bluegrass music. So on this one record, on one side you have Elvis covering a black bluesman, electric bluesman, and on the other side you have him covering the arguably the whitest of all the music at this point, bluegrass music, and making his own versions and presenting it to the public. Okay? So a very diverse mixture of things. His second record, Good Rockin' Tonight, that was originally by a rhythm and blues jump band style musician by the name of Roy Brown. So listen to the Elvis version of Good Rockin' Tonight, and then listen to the Roy Brown version of Good Rockin' Tonight. And then on the B side of that record was I Don't Care If the Sun Don't Shine. I Get My Lovin' in the Evening Time. That was an American popular song written by Mac David in 1951, I think. I could be wrong. I can't remember exactly what the day is. But the point is, it was out of the American popular song tradition. The recording that was very famous of that is the one I have uploaded for you. It was by Patti Page. So listen to the Elvis version of of I Don't Care If the Sun Don't Shine. Listen to the Patti Page version of I Don't Care If the Sun Don't Shine. On those two records, you get a Chicago electric bluesman, you get a white bluegrass musician from Kentucky, you get a Chicago a black jump blues musician, and then you get an American popular song composer. All different varieties, all different streams of music, all different types of music, black and white and popular and center and periphery and everything. It's all right there. On the first four Elvis songs, you get a little bit of everything, but just Elvis's versions of them. Okay. Later, he would record Mystery Train, which we've already talked about. And on the back side of that record was I Forgot to Remember to Forget, which was the first record that started charting for him. Number one on the Billboard Country and Western sales, and number one on the Country and Western Jukebox charts. And once he started charting, people started paying attention to Elvis. People from the center, the large record companies, and so on, they started to see that here's this guy from the periphery recording some music that seems to be catching on. What are we going to do about it, right? So we'll get back to that. Right now, I actually want you to go listen to all of these songs. Listen to both versions of That's All Right, both versions of Blue Moon of Kentucky, both versions of Good Rockin' Tonight, and both versions of I Don't Care If the Sun Don't Shine. And then, of course, come back. I know there's a lot to listen to here, but stick with me. All right, see you in a bit. Go. Okay. So, with that initial chart success, like I said, major record companies start paying attention. And RCA Victor actually bought out Elvis's contract from Sun Records for $35,000 in 1955. So this is really early, okay? And at that point, they start turning him into a mainstream performer just in time for these baby boomers to come of age and start to get really excited by this new music. If you were born in 1946, the very first of your baby boomer generation, you are 9, maybe 10 years old, 8 or 9 or 10 years old here, right? And again, you guys were all 9, 10, 11, 12 for the most part when you started getting into your own music. It's the same thing, right? So this is just what your your grandparents were going through, 60 years ago or whatnot. All right. turning Elvis into a mainstream performer. All right. So, as you can see, with RCA Victor's help, Elvis started to have a whole bunch of number one pop hits, 10 of them actually, in a 3-year span, 56 to 58. I've only put the 6 here that were number one for the most amount of time. Don't Be Cruel and Hound Dog were on the same record, 11 weeks at number one. Heartbreak Hotel, 8 weeks at number one. All Shook Up, 9 weeks at number one. Elvis dominated the popular charts here for quite a bit during 56 to 58. And you will see everybody else was trying to then come up with their own Elvis that could also dominate the charts during this era as well. Okay, Presley had a manager, the famous Colonel Thomas Parker, who history has not treated very kindly. There's a lot of people blame Colonel Parker for Elvis's early demise, but he worked very hard to get him on TV shows, the variety shows of that era, the Ed Sullivan TV show, and similar things. Dean Martin had a show. Elvis would appear on all these shows with other big stars. He also starred in a lot of Hollywood films, like B-roll, romantic comedy type things, Viva Las Vegas, Jailhouse Rock, Blue Hawaii. And in every one of these films, he sings. So we've talked about how Tin Pan Alley songwriters are writing songs for films. Well, a film with Elvis Presley is a gold mine for pop songs to be written, for Elvis to sing, and they enter sort of the American musical landscape through these films. Elvis, there was nobody after Elvis, people wanted to be like Elvis, but obviously Elvis didn't have an Elvis to be like or to emulate. Elvis actually wanted to be like Frank Sinatra. And that was the model. You know, Sinatra had a lot of hit records. He didn't write his own music. He appeared on TV. He starred in movies. So they just kind of did the same thing with Elvis. Okay. Even later, after he had to go into the military for a while in the late 50s, and then he came back and he had some hits even into the 60s. But a lot of these are more adult contemporary, like Crying in the Chapel was a number one adult contemporary hit, which is a different chart. Suspicious Minds, Burning Love, In the Ghetto, these are all late 60s, early 70s. But he appeared on the charts less regularly after the mid 60s. You get newer music, particularly the Beach Boys, the Beatles, other British invasion sorts of bands, the Rolling Stones and whatnot, and the musical landscape starts to change. Again, if you are the Elvis, if one of your grandparents or whatever is the Elvis fan, they were born in the late 40s, right? By the late 60s, they're already in their 20s. And so they're moving on in their life, and they were too old to really get into the Beatles or anything like that. So they might still stick with Elvis, but a lot of the kids that came afterwards, not so much. Okay, I want you to listen to "Don't Be Cruel." Okay, it is based on the 12-bar blues. It's got a bunch of Elvis idiosyncrasies, like his regional accent. He's being from Mississippi and growing up in Tennessee. His what they call the hiccuping effect. You'll also hear this in Buddy Holly. Like singing like that. Okay. It has other elements, both of rhythm and blues and country and western. A very prominent guitar part, which is very much out of western swing. The strong backbeat on the drum set from rhythm and blues. Background vocals like a doo-wop group, right? And again, the B-side of this was Hound Dog, which I've actually already had you listen to that version and the Big Mama Thornton's version. So go check out Don't Be Cruel, right? And then come back again and let's keep going. Go. So Elvis Presley's popularity is really based on his innovative stuff from 56 to 58, when he was at the top of the charts on a major record company doing lots and lots of like number one hits and stuff like that. He did have plenty of success afterwards, but he was less innovative. and he was rapidly sort of surpassed by other groups. Okay, he died unfortunately at the age of 42 in 1977. His home is Graceland in Memphis, Tennessee, and it is a public museum. You can go check it out. But again, the early years of rock and roll were Elvis's sort of main. That's where his influence and legacy comes from. Okay, so we've had three rhythm and blues artists that became rock and roll stars: Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Fats Domino, and we're gonna have three country artists, or out of the white country mold. The first being Elvis, the second being Bill Haley and the Comets. Bill Haley is an interesting story. He was actually very much a country musician. He was a DJ and a Western swing band leader. We talked about Western swing. That was Bill Haley's bread and butter. In fact, he had a group called the Saddlemen. But somebody smart said, drop the cowboy thing and go with this new stuff. So he changed his name from Bill Haley and the Saddlemen to Bill Haley and the Comets. And in 1954, the Comets were signed to a major record label, Decca. They adopted more of a rhythm and blues jump band sound, and the rest is history. If you have ever seen the movie Toy Story 2, you all might be of the generation that saw that movie as kids, or have seen it since then. I have kids, and they have saw it. They've seen it multiple times, right? So I know this particular story pretty well. There's an episode where Woody gets kidnapped, right? And he ends up with all of the other toys from Woody's Roundup. Prospector and Jesse and Bullseye the horse and stuff like that. And they're introducing him to who he was by showing him all of the paraphernalia from the 50s, the old black and white TV show that was Woody's Roundup, all this kind of stuff. And he's watching the shows, and it ends on a cliffhanger. And he goes, he's really excited. What happens next? What goes on? And the prospector shuts off the TV and says, nothing happens next. The show was canceled. And he's like, why was the show canceled? And this is sort of the overarching theme almost of all the Toy Story movies. It's because Sputnik was launched into space, and the space race now took over all the Western cowboy stuff. That's exactly what happened to Bill Haley. Bill Haley was a Western swing band leader with the name Bill Haley and the Saddlemen. And then circumstances changed. The old Western thing was not hip anymore. The new thing is going to be space. So he changes his name to Bill Haley and the Comets. It's all right there. And the rest is history. So Bill Haley and the Comets, not nearly as popular or successful as Elvis. They didn't write a whole lot of music. They basically recorded covers of rhythm and blues hits. We already gave you Shake, Rattle, and Roll, for example. He also performed a song, Rock Around the Clock, which became famous in the film Blackboard Jungle from 1955, which is sort of about teenage rebelliousness. Later became the theme song to the TV show Happy Days for the first couple of seasons. I've uploaded Rock Around the Clock for you to listen to. By all means, check it out. You've already listened to Shake, Rattle, and Roll. That's a little bit of Bill Haley in the Comets for you. Okay. The third white early rock and roll star to come out of essentially the country and Western tradition was Buddy Holly. Buddy Holly started in country music, but again, influenced by early rock and roll, and Elvis Presley formed a rock band, and it was called the Crickets. And he recorded a song in this new style. His first one was That'll Be the Day. I have uploaded it for you. It was number one on the pop charts in 1957. It has a lot of Elvis isms. Again, the hiccuping regional accent. Buddy Holly himself was an accomplished guitar player. He played like Chuck Berry. So he had some of those rhythm and blues or Western swing elements in his guitar playing. Other than that, it's a carefully crafted rock and roll pop song, right? I want you to go listen to That'll Be the Day. And if you haven't already, the Bill Haley and the Comets tune as well. And then come back and we'll talk about a few more things. Go! Okay, once again, welcome back. So, as I mentioned, Buddy Holly's vocal style is very much kind of a combination country twangs, the hiccups, the Elvis, the other elements like that. Um, the Crickets instrumental lineup was two guitars, bass, and drums, which is exactly the same lineup that the Beatles adopted. So that sort of became the standard of early rock and roll, and obviously the rest of rock and roll. There'd be obviously trios and 5-piece and groups and larger, but this 4-piece, two guitars, bass, drum pretty much became the standard. Okay. I want you to go, as I said, listen to That'll Be the Day. Again, standard, typical pop song, right? Some of it during the instrumental break is a 12-bar blues. So if you've already listened to it, great. If you want to go listen to it now, fantastic. Check it out and then come back. Okay. Sadly, Buddy Holly was killed in 1959 in a plane crash in Iowa with two other early rock stars, Richie Valens, who was famous for the song La Bamba, and J.P. Richardson was known as the Big Bopper. He had a big hit called Chantilly Lace at the time. And actually, they had played Green Bay just like a couple of days before that. They had played a concert here, and they were going to, from Iowa, they were going to go up to northwestern Minnesota in a town called Moorhead. The bus was breaking down. It was February. It was very cold. So Buddy Holly chartered a plane. And like a little crop dusting plane, they found a little country pilot who would bring them up to Moorhead, Minnesota, so they could get in a hotel and get warmed up and have a comfortable night's sleep instead of riding the bus. The three stars of the show got on the plane, and unfortunately, it took off and got a couple hundred feet in the air, and then something went wrong and it crashed in an Iowa cornfield. So that's the sad thing there. There's a famous song written about this, which I have also uploaded to Moodle for you. It's by Don McLean. It's called American Pie. And while Don McLean, it's a long song and it's about lots of things, Don McLean never specifically said, I wrote it about this one incident. But the very beginning, I've included a version from YouTube that has the lyrics. It talks about a young man delivering newspapers on a cold February morning when he reads the headline that Buddy Holly dies. And that's the day the music dies, which is a common line in the song American Pie. So I'm almost certain you've heard that. Go check out Don McLean's American Pie, at least the first couple minutes of it, and how it relates to the death of Buddy Holly. And then come back. All right. All right. A lot of talking here. So up until this point, we've talked about very few women. There was Big Mama Thornton and Ruth Brown in R&B, right? We talked about Kitty Wells in country music, right? Now that we're in rock and roll and it's this sort of rebellious sort of new music, I want to talk a little bit more about women here for a couple of reasons. Number one, not many women were very popular here. The ones who did sort of real rock and roll or rockabilly were less popular, really because of the new music, the image of the new music, what America expected of its young ladies at this time. If you were a young lady, your future prospects in the 1950s, it was probably a pretty short list. That was like mom or wife, mom, maybe a secretary, a flight attendant, something like that, right? Stewardess, I guess they would have called them. At that time, your career prospects were limited. And rock and roll singer was definitely not one of them. America was not ready for a lot of wild rock and roll ladies at this time. The women that do become relatively popular as singers are generally a little more, again, safer and conservative looking, and sing more conservative songs. But they were still a presence, and again, this kind of fits into that everyone is trying to chase this new thing. Elvis is new, Rock and roll is new. Let's get female versions of this new stuff and see if we can profit on it. So that's really what happened early on. Okay. Early rock dominated by male artists, women who embrace the trends, a negligible negligible presence on the charts. Okay. I'm going to give you four early sort of female rockabilly performers. Rockabilly is a combination of rock and hillbilly. So these are all white performers. They came out of the countryside of things. Now it's called rockabilly. My personal favorite is Wanda Jackson. She was a relatively successful country singer, but with encouragement, not from Elvis, with encouragement from Elvis, she switched to this new rockabilly. Okay? And during exactly the same years, 56 to 58, that Elvis had all those number one hits, she recorded a bunch of great songs, like Hot Dog That Made Him Mad, which is about, I did this to piss off my boyfriend, and then it made him mad. But then he hugged me and kissed me and asked me not to do it again. Every verse ends that way. It's silly. And then she would do something else to make him mad. And then he'd get angry. And then I hugged him and I kissed him and he asked me not to do it again. It's very 1955, really. Mean, mean man, let's have a party. My favorite song, and the one I've shared with you, is Fujiyama Mama. It's not very PC. The very opening verse is, I've been to Nagasaki, Hiroshima too. The same we did to them, baby, I will do to you. Of course, just 12 years earlier, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it's not exactly a politically correct song. But they talk about, so it's basically this image of this really tough gal. Another verse is, I drink a quart of sake, smoke dynamite, I chase it with tobacco, and then shoot out the lights. One of my other favorite verses is something about, people talk about me, say that I mean, I'll blow your head off, baby, with nitroglycerine. Which is just fascinating to me. And it really is the perfect song for this argument. Here you have this young, attractive lady who's been moderately successful in the country realm singing the most rebellious, in-your-face sort of song about blowing things up or beating people up or I can drink and smoke with the best of them. And that is exactly the opposite of what America was ready for out of their young ladies, right? So by all means, please go listen to Fujiyama Mama. It's absolutely a fantastic record. And check out some of her other tunes if you wish. They're all great classic rockabilly tunes. None of them were hits. Wanda Jackson charted on the top 40 twice. And one was 39 and one was 36, I think. And neither of those were Fujiyama Mama. Anyway, go check out Fujiyama Mama and then come back for more. Go. Okay, I promised other female performers. I've spared you lots of other clips, though, because the materials I uploaded to Moodle were, as you can see, extensive. So I would recommend just Google some of these things, go to YouTube, look some of these things up if you have time. They're really great sort of pieces of a bygone era. Again, none of them were hits. All right, Janice Martin was literally promoted as the female Elvis. Elvis was a big star. We're going to do as much Elvis as we can, right? So she had a song called My Boy Elvis or Drugstore Rock and Roll. I play My Boy Elvis when we do it in class. Joanne Campbell, she was known as the Blonde Bombshell. Again, sort of an outdated sort of thing. She appeared in a lot of these early sort of tacky early rock and roll movies by Alan Freed, like Go Johnny Go and Hey Let's Twist. And then Lori Collins, who actually got her start with her brother. They were called the Collins Kids. And she also made a bunch of her own records, like Mercy and Heartbeat. Again, same era, 56 to 58. That Elvis had a bunch of his hits, and Wanda Jackson tried to have a bunch of hits. Again, great songs. None of them commercially popular. All women were gifted early rock and roll performers. Martin, Campbell, and Collins are so obscure that they have nearly been written out of history. There is a very large book called The Rolling Stone History of Women in Rock, and Joanne Martin, Janice Martin, Joanne Campbell, and Lori Collins are not mentioned in the book. So, kind of interesting. Again, as I mentioned, the conservatism of the 1950s, both politically and culturally, not ready for their ladies, their young ladies, to be rock and roll stars, to be front and center, to be doing this kind of music. Okay. There were some other successful female artists, however, in other types of music, or singing, again, more sort of pop tunes in a sense. Okay. For example, the Bobettes. The Bobettes was an African-American group of girls, kind of like doo-wop, right? They wrote a song about their fifth grade teacher called Mr. Lee. They obviously had a crush on him. They wrote this song. It became quite popular. Number 1 on the rhythm and blues, number 6 on the pop charts. I would like you to go listen to the Bobettes version of Mr. Lee. And given what you have now learned about cover versions, and the Bobettes being a African-American vocal group, you can imagine that this was a sort of rhythm and blues / black rock and roll song, right, on a small record label. It was, of course, covered then by a larger record label with a white singer, and actually it was covered by Joanne Campbell, the blonde bombshell. So I've recorded that version as well, or I've uploaded that version as well. Listen to the Bobettes version, listen to the Joanne Campbell version. The Bobettes version climbed all the way up to number 6 on the pop charts. The Joanne Campbell version didn't chart at all. So here you have the original black version doing much, much better than any cover versions. Okay, but go check those out. And then, of course, come back. We're getting there. Okay. I hope you're enjoying listening to all these tunes. And again, if you have the chance, listen to them around your parents or your grandparents. They might recognize some of these tunes. One female pop star who was very popular from this era was Connie Francis. She was the first really well-known female pop star. So after Patti Page sort of being the pre-rock and roll big well-known singer, Connie Francis was the big well-known singer during the early rock and roll era. She had a lot of hit songs, again, starting in 58, 59, 60-ish sort of stuff. Stupid Cupid or Lipstick on Your Collar. Again, a lot of teeny love songs and that kind of stuff. Her biggest hit was a song called Who's Sorry Now? And it's not Fujiyama Mama. I'll just say that. It's not in your face. It's not intense. It's not rebellious. It's a love song. It's kind of about lost love, and instead of her having the broken heart, he's the one who is sorry now, right? I've uploaded that to Moodle as well. So go check out Connie Francis's Who's Sorry Now. And again, compare it to Fujiyama Mama, and just, get the different sort of different sort of feels, and put yourself in a 1957 conservative America sort of mindset. And I think it's pretty clear to see how Connie Francis's tune was more popular than Wanda Jackson. Okay, so do that. And again, come on back. Okay, we are almost done with this long lecture. Okay. In early rock and roll, as technology improves, as technology improves, we're going to start talking about other things, like particularly songwriters, and how a lot of these songs were not written by the people that performed them. Once you get to the Beach Boys and the Beatles, that happens more often. Chuck Berry wrote his songs. Little Richard wrote a lot of his songs, but Elvis Presley didn't. Bill Haley and the Comets didn't write their own songs, right? So there's still that mentality. And Connie Francis didn't write her own songs. A lot of the Wanda Jacksons or the Joanne Campbells, a lot of those songs were written by professional songwriters, okay? So we're going to talk more about the role of songwriters. We're also going to start talking about the role of producers, and how there's a certain sound that develops in the very late 50s, early 60s in particular. A very specific sound, but we'll cover that in a future lecture. But that influences, because so many hit records were made with that sound, it was copied by so many other people, and it actually sort of became the go-to sound of a particular era, right? So we're going to talk about all these things in upcoming lectures. I just want to touch on some songwriters really briefly and then wrap things up today, okay? So songwriting and performing boundaries start to blur. Again, a lot of performers write their own material, but certainly not all of them. The rock and roll, or that tradition lies in the predecessors of rock and roll. Rhythm and blues. A lot of rhythm and blues musicians wrote their own material. Some of the country and western musicians, Hank Williams, Jimmy Rogers, right? They wrote their own material. So that tradition continues. On the flip side, in the American popular song tradition, Frank Sinatra did not write his own material, right? Rosemary Clooney did not write her own material. So there's kind of a mixed bag here, okay? Independent songwriters become less of a big deal. There's less of a sort of Irving Berlin vibe or George Gershwin vibe, but they are still there, and they're still writing good songs. They're just writing different songs because pop music has changed now. It's now more rock and rollish than these 32-bar Tin Pan Alley songs of before. Okay, and again, the record producers will talk about them a little bit more coming up. But we're going to end with this sort of thing here. And just as an example of songwriters in the rhythm and blues era, you get Leiber and Stoller. These guys are very well-known rhythm and blues songwriting team. They wrote early rock and roll tunes. They wrote rhythm and blues. They loved rhythm and blues music. They started writing songs as teenagers, as you can see there. They did not perform them themselves. They wrote songs that were performed by everybody, particularly Elvis. Elvis wrote a whole bunch of Leiber and Stoller, or recorded a whole bunch of Leiber and Stoller tunes. Okay, I'm going to give you an example of a group by the Coasters, or a song by the Coasters that was written by Leiber and Stoller, and that song is Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown is another one of those kind of like doo-wop type of hits from the early rock and roll era. So the Coasters were a vocal harmony group. All right. This is another one of those songs that speaks to a young audience. It's about a class clown. Charlie Brown is like a older sort of flunky who's been held back a couple grades. So they speed the tape up to kind of have like a chipmunk voices for the young students. And then Charlie Brown has this really low voice, like, who, me? Right? That sort of thing. Invoking hip terms of the 1950s like daddy-o and cool. That's all in here. All right. Again, it's a language, and it's about a class clown, and it resonates with young people, and the young people are buying these records. Okay. Like I mentioned with Little Richard and Chuck Berry, you can get a lot of fast text, a lot of fast singing. You get that in this record as well, and some more of those just comic novelty things like timpani strokes and stuff like that. So go check out Charlie Brown, right? I want you to listen to that particular recording. If you want to break it down, and again, I didn't provide a listening guide because I don't think it's terribly necessary, but this one combines a pop song format, AABA, with the 12-bar blues. All of the A sections are 12-bar blues. The B section is like a different bridge. It's like a 16-bar. No, I'm sorry. The B section is an 8-bar bridge. So you actually get 12 bars, 12 bars, 8 bars, 12 bars. But again, not super important. It's more about the style and the sound and the fact that it was not written by the Coasters. It was written by professional songwriters writing this. This is what new popular songs are now that we're in the late 50s and early 60s. And so a lot of songwriters are going to start writing these sorts of things instead of I've Got Rhythm or White Christmas or songs like that. Okay. That's it, folks. You did a great job. Way to hang in. I know there was a lot of things to listen to. Make sure you finish the daily assignment. There were a couple more questions that need to be finished. A couple more about cover versions, 7, 8, and 9, right? So go back and do that. And then, of course, send that to me as soon as you can. Start working on that first Billboard listening assignment that I have now uploaded for you as well. It will take some time. And so I would encourage you, if you can't do it all in one sitting, and that might be a lot to ask because that's listening to a lot of music, and just trying to focus and concentrate. So start now and chip away at a certain number of songs every day, keeping in mind that you will get 2 more of those. So there's going to be a lot more listening that you need to do. And we are rapidly approaching sort of the end of our time together. So just get a head start on that. In addition to all of the other things, your final research paper, right? In addition to all those other things as well. So there's quite a bit going on. As always, let me know if you have any questions. Again, I appreciate you hanging in here for this, arguably the longest lecture of the whole class, right? That's it. Well done. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.